Welcome to Hope on Fire, relevant talk radio for young adults. Whether you're 25 or 45, there's bound to be a discussion that you care about. Our mission is to share practical ways to find God in your everyday life. And now let's join today's host, Rick Mann.
With over 200 million accounts, MySpace has become one of the most popular destinations on the web for young adults. The online social networking site is home to personalities of all ages, including rock and pop stars, political candidates, and even Christians. Of course, with the good comes the bad, and no doubt you've heard horror stories of how MySpace is also home to online predators, computer viruses, and porn peddlers. But as with many things of the world, MySpace is simply a tool, and if used correctly, can be a great way for Christians to connect with like-minded people in a world hungry to learn more about God. This week on Hope on Fire, we're going to cut through all the hype and the scary stories to see what online social networks are all about and how parents can deal with the dangers and opportunities that these sites create for their kids. Joining us this week as we discuss this very interesting topic is my co-host, Chris Lang. Chris, welcome.
Hey, Rick. Good to be here.
And our guest is Jason Illian, a young adult author and speaker who's written a great little book called MySpace, My Kids. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, glad to have you. You know, before we get started, Jason, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself and some of your background and why this topic is of interest for you?
Yeah. Well, I've always been interested, even with speaking and writing, is having an impact on culture, is really saying, how does our faith really work and live out on a daily basis? You know, we did that in college through Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and then I left and did, even in the finance world, I was thinking, how do I live my faith out on a daily basis? And so what had happened is my first book I wrote was on Christian relationships, dating relationships. And through this whole process, what I was seeing is these dating relationships, these real-world relationships were starting to go online. And through these online relationships is how are these social networks being built? Because it's not, when we say social network, we're just not talking about a bunch of cords and wires and saying this is how we connect, but how do we interact as humans?
Right.
And the real passion for me, and I think should be for all believers, is what we have with Christ is not just, you know, a transactional approach, but a real, live, daily, personal relationship.
Right.
We don't have a religion, we have a relationship. And that's why learning about these social networks was so important to me, is like how we build relationships with one another represents how we build relationships with our Savior and vice versa.
Well, that's great. I mean, well, let's talk about why are these online social networking sites like MySpace or, you know, other ones that might be out there, why are they so popular? I mean, what's the connection? Why are people so engaged with them?
Yeah. Well, we were kind of talking about this earlier from the standpoint, I think people are longing for authenticity, for transparency. We live in this world where we're so connected, yet at the same time, we're disconnected. We're lonely and we're kind of isolated on our own. And so people are longing for these real relationships. And when they don't find them in the real world, they naturally go online to find somebody that will hear their voice. And I think in a lot of ways as Christians, we've done a really poor job. We've done a really poor job of reaching out. So many times we keep our hands inside of our church.
Right.
Instead of reaching out to those people that need us, to the people that, you know, that are poor and that are needy and that are hungry and that just need a voice of somebody to listen to them, a shoulder to cry on. And because of all this, these social networks have sprung up, and there can be a lot of good things about them, but at the same time, a lot of people are just searching for authentic relationships. They want somebody to hear them and know that they're valued in this world.
You know, I think it's kind of interesting because, you know, for the longest time when the internet first came out, it was this impersonal place where people could be anonymous, and it was, you know, people were, you know, complained if you spent too much time because you're not being social. But the interesting thing is what I've seen and what you've just hit on is the fact that the internet is now becoming more of a connection tool and not just this impersonal place that you know, are anonymous. It's really a place where people can connect.
Yeah, I saw the other day. I was walking down by one of the malls near where I live, and there were 3 girls, all in their teens, sitting right next to each other, all texting on their cell phones. Right? They weren't talking to each other anymore. They were texting either each other or friends, yet they were all sitting next to each other.
Right.
And I think that's a pretty fair comparison and representation of what's happening in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think technology actually has created not only the good things, but also a sense of isolation.
Right.
among people who live, not just because of broken homes and things, but the technology itself. We're driving around in our cars, or we're texting our friends, and we're really not connecting.
Right. We're together, but we're not together. We're together, but we're still, you know, emotionally and spiritually apart, because even though you can stay connected by the bits and the bytes and the keystrokes, we're not actually sharing the meaningful moments of life. And when those things aren't shared, then we really miss that connection that Christ has for us.
Right. Well, this whole social networking thing, like MySpace, it's not just for high school kids, right? I mean,
no.
it's not, you know, it's not just this phenomenon that where the kids are doing it. It's actually much more than that, right?
Yeah, I mean, MySpace is a perfect example. You know, MySpace took off, and it was actually just originally built, you know, a lot of people don't know, it was built just for a way for fans to keep up with their favorite indie bands. But people figured, hey, we can talk to each other through this too. And so it
By the way, for those who don't know what indie means, independent.
Independent bands,
not on a large label.
Are we explaining for the other co-host?
Well,
is that what this is?
I was like, what? Indie band?
I can have note cards.
Yeah.
Independent.
Indie band. There might be some people who don't know what it means. So anyway.
But basically what it was a way for them to connect with one another. And it started as kind of, you know, the young, hip high schoolers, but then it grew to realize that we all kind of want this. We want a way to connect. And so MySpace grew from, you know, a couple million to 200 million.
Wow.
And it's the same thing with, you know, Facebook, or, you know, there's called LinkedIn, which is a professional kind of social networking for professionals and, you know, kind of like more executive types. And so there are social networks that are then starting to break off into the more niche areas. And I think that's a good thing, because it's connecting those groups that have so much in common.
Right. Chris, I have to ask you, do you have a MySpace page?
I have to confess, Rick, I do, actually. And actually, it's been a tremendous experience. In addition, one of the things I heard you mention is that it's kind of like being in a big city. And I've sensed that same thing. You can find the good along with the bad, mostly bad, but also a lot of good.
Right.
And in my case, I've connected with old college friends of mine that I haven't even talked to for 15 years. So the beauty in reconnecting in such a large community, in addition to meeting believers that I had never met before, right in my own area here in Central Florida.
Yeah. And it is like a large city. There's a lot of good people in the city, but sometimes those few bad people skew it in the wrong direction.
Right.
And, you know, I think that's happened a lot with MySpace. Is a perfect example. Is we've jumped on the panic button a lot just because we don't understand it. We're not educated on it.
Right.
And then we're saying, well, the whole community must be representative of these few people that have done it wrong.
Right.
And that's not the case. It's not the case in, you know, any social network or church or even corporation. When the CEO does something bad, that's not a representation of everybody. It's just a very obvious mistake that has been made, and then that unfortunately spills down to everybody.
You know, it's one of those things where I had gone to MySpace, and I was like, you know, this is kind of kiddie. This is, you know, not real that big of a deal. I'm a computer professional, so I'm looking at it going, this is just, you know, I could probably program this myself. Why couldn't I make $1 billion on it?
Right.
But it was when one of my best friend's wives said, hey, do you have a MySpace page? And I'm looking at her. She's like, you know, 30-something years old and a couple kids, and I'm like, well, maybe I should check it out myself. And when I did, and just like Chris, it was pretty cool. I started connecting with high school friends, college friends, you know, my other friends that, you know, I actually do connect with, you know, on a daily basis. And so it's just this melting pot of opportunity to contact other people and make connections in a new, meaningful way.
Yeah, and it becomes so difficult in this society because we're able to basically fly anywhere, have any job we want. You know, our family's all spread out. This is kind of the first time in American history where we have the opportunity to live anywhere and pretty much do anything.
Right.
Well, it's hard to keep up with all of our friends in that environment. And so if you can kind of have a landing ground, a landing page that keeps people updated with what you're doing, and these are my pictures, and this is my family, and these are the things going on, it lets us connect with those. And, you know, I think all of us have a story where we found that, you know, old high school buddy or that old flame or that person you didn't want to run into, you know, you ran into them in MySpace. But yeah, they can be used for great things, and I think a lot of people are realizing that.
You know, the other interesting thing that I've found, Jason, is the tremendous insight that you get into somebody's heart, because you can write just about anything on your MySpace page or your Facebook page or whatever it might be, and actually share a piece of your heart, which is dynamic, you know, because you don't get that from any other kind of medium.
Right.
So the potential for the Christian to actually find out that somebody's hurting right now, maybe somebody who left the church, who's been hurt by somebody, you can actually find that out in this kind of medium, which is really a powerful opportunity.
You bring up a great point, because I often tell parents parents when they look at their kids' MySpace accounts, what you're seeing right there is a symptom. It's not the problem. If there's something wrong, that's a symptom of a deeper underlying problem that your kid is shouting out for help, whether it be for drugs or loneliness or depression, whatever it is.
Right.
That's just a symptom. And so we do get this opportunity, like never before. We get to see the people that are hurting. We get an opportunity to minister to them, to connect with them. And that's the very basis and hope of our faith anyways, is to find these people and, you know, go out there and reach out to them. And this gives us a platform in which to do that.
What are some of the other positive ways, you know, in the second half of the show when we start talking about some of the dangers and how parents need to maybe step in or, you know, be a part of their kid's life when it comes to this MySpace social networking thing. What are some other ways that as Christians, as young adults, we can positively use, you know, a MySpace account?
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about sharing the gospel. Is there any other thing that we can do? Or, you know, we talked about connections and sharing the gospel. What else can, you know, is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more than just connection to sharing the gospel. It's a way to tell our story, you know. Even if you're not a Christian, we often call it a testimony when you're a Christian, right? But it's our story. It's our life story. And through our life stories, we're able to connect on many different levels. And, you know, even parents have been saying for years, I wish my teenagers would talk to me, you know, because they come home and say, what'd you learn today? Nothing. So, you know, why am I sending you to school again?
Right.
Well, guess what? They're writing this stuff down.
Yeah.
They're putting it in a form that we can actually find a way to have these tough discussions. And, you know, it's tough to bring up talking about, you know, alcohol or sex or all these things. But you can use these things that you're learning as a door.
Right.
To walk through and have that difficult discussion. And in through that difficult discussion, then talk about your faith.
Right.
Because our faith influences all these tough things. And so we can use those things as doors. And I think that is, if nothing else, just the way to have those conversations that we need to be having anyways, that sometimes are hard to have in this face-to-face environment.
Right.
If we can use the online to guide that, I think that's great.
You know, I have a friend of mine, Alan Martin, who has a MySpace page, and you know, he posted a message on MySpace page as well and said, hey, listen, what I'm going to be doing for the next however long it takes is I'm going to rotate everybody on my friends list up into my top 8 once a week.
Right.
And every week I'm going to pray for those top 8 people on my friends list. And I thought that was one of the coolest things. I'm like, wow, you know, here's a guy that, you know, I went to college with, did a lot of stuff with, you know, with drama and things in ministry, and he's out in he's up in Andrews now, up in Michigan. And, you know, here, not only is it taking the connection of just sending me a message, but now saying, listen, you're going to pray for me. And, you know, now I have another connection with him. Right. That's, you know, completely, you know, outside of the internet and this, you know.
And there's all sorts of that type of stuff going on. You just don't hear about it in the media. Like we talk about the predators and the problems of the pornography. We hear about that.
Right.
But what we don't hear about is all these youth groups that are using this as a way to connect with the kids that would never be there.
Right.
We never hear about these other small ministries that are using this as a way to talk to this culture and get into these issues, or friends that are praying for one another, or emails that are going behind the scenes. You don't hear that because that's not newsworthy, but that's the power.
It's true. The ability to send out an immediate message to all of your friends on your list, it might be up to I know you have several thousand in your list, to send out a bulletin instantly from a social consciousness perspective or other points. It's just a powerful medium to communicate.
Agreed.
Well, when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about some of the dangers that are out there. We're not completely oblivious to that, and talk about the parents' role in their kids' lives. So we'll be right back. This is Hope on Fire. Welcome back to Hope on Fire. This week we are talking about MySpace, My Kids, and the opportunities as parents and young adults that we have when it comes to online social networking on the internet. And my guest this week is Jason Illian. Glad you're here, Jason.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, before the break, we kind of talked about all the really good things about social networking.
Yes, we did.
And the opportunities as young adults that we have to connect in brand new ways with those around us, our friends and people we might not even know. Now, the second half of the show, we would be remiss if we actually didn't talk about the dangers that are out there. And as parents, as young adult parents, as our kids, you know, get older, things that we need to be aware of. Let's talk about it. What are some of the negatives that we need to be aware of and things that we need to be conscious of as we enter into this, you know, this networking area?
Yeah, well, you know, the big three that I often talk about with parents is that, first of all, you have to be worried about the predators that are online, and that's kind of obvious. You've seen all the Nightline shows and the Newsweek articles saying that there's predators out there, and there are. There are people that will take advantage of your kids. We all want to believe that deep down, you know, everybody's good and has our best interests in mind, but we know that's not the case. So we have to protect against that. There's also something we call misalignment, meaning your kid's one thing in the real world, and then he's his alter ego online.
Right.
Right. We've all heard this horror story about somebody that was 14, then he goes online and he's 27, right? And he's a stud and he's a supermodel. And Brad Paisley even wrote a song called "I'm Much Better Looking Online." You know, right? We're all cooler online. You know, I'm cooler online. We all are. And then the third one's just pornography. I mean, there's no porn allowed specifically on MySpace or these social networks, but most of the big porn stars have MySpace accounts.
Right.
So you can link to that outside of there. Now, from a parent's perspective, you still have to be a parent.
Right.
And I think this is just shouting at us why you have to be a parent. You know, I saw a Dr. Phil show where they asked this one mom to come on, and she talked about how she went online and she lied about who she was, and she basically seduced her sons to come and act like they were something else, and everybody cheered them on. And I was thinking, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Because we're supposed to build trust.
Right.
We're not here to spy on our kids. We're here to parent.
Right.
Not spy, parent. And if we want our kids to have the same level of integrity and honesty and trust, we have to model that for them.
Right.
And that means you do have a responsibility, and that's to be a parent, both in the real world and the online world.
Well, why can't we just trust our kids? I mean, why can't we just say, well, we'll let it go, and, you know, I trust my kid inherently, so they should be okay. Is that not a good thing to kind of be your rule of thumb, or?
Right. Well, you were 14 once.
Yeah.
I mean, we were all young once, and
but I was a pretty boring 14-year-old. But I did have some pretty exciting.
Don't make me call you out. Don't make me call you out on the air. I know you did some stuff, and now at the internet, I can find it.
Yeah, that's right. Thankfully, MySpace wasn't out there back then.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the thing, is a lot of times that we're just growing at this age, and sometimes we just don't know better.
Right.
And so we trust, and we put our, you know, a blog out there, and like we were talking about before, it's not a diary. It's not like just I read it. You write something, and 10,000 of your friends read it, and they email it to everybody else. And kind of, it used to be the schoolyard bully was the big, strong guy that could push you around.
Right.
Now it's the guy that can surf the net the fastest. You know, it's the guy that knows how to get the information and put it out there. And so there's a lot of cyberbullying that goes on.
Wow.
And so these are things that we have to protect our kids from, and we have to teach them through it. And the struggles that we had when we were 18, 19, 20, they're having now at 11, 12, 13.
And that's the scary thing about being a parent.
Absolutely, because this information, there's no way to completely block them from culture.
Right.
Because they're being sold images all the time. You can't buy Cheetos without a lady in a bikini walking by, right?
That's right.
And so we have to educate our kids and be even closer to them to walk them through these things. And if we don't have any sense that MySpace or social networking even exists, you are putting your child in harm's way.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine the fact that the kinds of exposure and Pandora's box, as it were, that kids are learning at 9 and 10 years old now, where, like you said, 16, 17, 18, parents were needing to have conversations about pornography and the dangers of this kind of, especially this medium now, Rick. I mean, you've got 2 little ones, and the kind of the way technology is changing the pressure on the parents to start at an earlier age.
Right.
Because you can't just unplug the internet now.
No.
Our world has changed.
Right. Well, I don't know if you guys read, but like 2 weeks ago, there was a stat that came out that said the pornography industry has now eclipsed the movie industry in the amount of revenue it brings in, just domestically on a yearly basis. Well, that means just look how prolific it is.
Right.
I mean, it's out there everywhere. And if we don't know how to talk to our kids about these issues, I mean, when we were a kid, the only way you saw porn is if it came in a magazine, right? And you had to steal it from somewhere.
Right.
Well, of course, I didn't know about that back then.
Yeah, sure you didn't. You both are lying here today. I'm here for a counseling session.
Yeah.
We'll take this off the air later. Yeah. But you know, that's the problem.
Right.
Is like it's hard to have those conversations as parents, but if we don't have those conversations, you know, we are not arming them to be the women and men of God that they're designed to be.
And maybe that leads us into our next question. I mean, in your book, you talk about 3 different areas that we can connect and engage with our kids better. And the first one, I think, was, well, it's a great starting point. It's patience.
Right.
What did you mean by that? I mean, why do we have to have patience when we start this connection with our kids?
Yeah, well, the first time that a lot of parents go on and see their kids' MySpace, they just lose it.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yep.
I always say the first thing you need to do is breathe. You know, put down the chair that you're about to swing and breathe here. Because a lot of times when you see your kids' MySpace, they're just crying out for help. You know, they're crying out that somebody pay attention to me, that somebody noticed that I'm here, somebody noticed that I'm important. And so I think there's a reason that Paul wrote that love is patient first. He saw that this virtue is so important, I'm going to tell it to you first.
Right.
And it's the same thing with working with our children, is like, we've got to be patient first, because we probably don't know all the facts. We probably don't know the full situation. And if we are a little patient, God will open it up and reveal it to us. So patience is key.
Right. And it's not to say that every kid out there has got this wild and crazy MySpace
No, of
page.
course
It's
not.
those little things that just might freak out a parent. And I think sometimes we forget that we were young, you know, at one time, you know, before.
We are young up here.
Well,
I mean,
we are, yes, yeah. But
I mean,
you know,
them.
yeah,
people out there. Exactly.
Those other guys. But you know, when you see your 14-year-old girl, you know, wearing a shirt and she's saying, you know, I like to party on her MySpace page, you're like, oh, there's a disconnect there that I think can really freak a parent out. But yet we need to realize that kids are just being kids, and they're trying to appear to be older than they really are.
Yeah, and cool. You know, I saw one 16-year-old that I pointed her mom to her account, and her mom just came up to me afterwards, and it said on her account, you know, I puke glitter. And my first thought is that sounds painful.
Right.
You know, but the second thing is she was trying to be cool.
Right.
Yeah.
But her mom just took it as
being
like
silly or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. Her mom just took like, what's going on? What am I missing? You know, just kind of like running in from left field.
Right.
And it's kind of one of those things that if we're not patient first and we don't really try to understand where they're coming from, we're probably going to miss out on that connection we need to be a parent with them.
Wow.
You mentioned this house is not a democracy in your book. How does that interact with the patience thing?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they're living under your roof, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of things that we need to be patient and talk through. But at the end of the day, my mom always said, this place is not a democracy.
Right.
The house isn't.
And that's where it comes in with the discipline aspect of it.
Absolutely. You know, I didn't get to vote on eating my green beans or going to school. I didn't get to vote on those.
Right.
It's not a democracy. It's your house. You make the decisions. And at the end of the day, you want to build that relationship so that they can earn your trust. It's kind of like teaching your kid to drive, right? You don't just throw him the keys when he turns 16 and says, go get him. You know, you drive with them.
Right.
You teach them how to drive, and as they get older and earn that trust, you let them have more freedom. Well, it's the same thing on the information superhighway. We walk with them for a while, we teach them how to drive, and then sooner or later, they get old enough to go out of the house and drive on their own.
Right.
And hopefully by then, they've learned enough that they know the road signs here on the internet.
So we've talked about patience, we've talked about discipline. What about honesty? Where does that play into this connection with our kids?
Yeah, you know, I think a lot of times, and if you even go on MySpace or Facebook, the reason that kids are lying is because adults are lying. You know, we're all trying to make ourselves look better and taller and thinner and smarter, and none of us are comfortable in our own skin. And if we would just be honest and say, you know, this is what I aspire to be, but these are my shortcomings.
Right.
Because it's through these shortcomings that our kids connect with us, because they realize that they're imperfect. And just going back to our whole faith thing is when we realize that we're imperfect and our kids see this, then it's easier to share the gospel of Christ. Because when you're imperfect, you realize you're a sinner, therefore you need a Savior.
Right.
And when we paint ourselves as perfect, then we don't need a Savior. And we do that to our kids by saying, you know, I grew up perfectly. And that's why a lot of parents don't talk to their kids, is they know deep down that they didn't do it right. And they're like, well, if I tell my kids this, then he's not going to respect me. No, he's going to respect you more. Because you realize now that you needed the Savior. You needed saving. You needed help. And if their kid would learn that, then he would grow up under that same mindset.
Right. And I think it's one of the biggest challenges that I face as my kids get older is telling them, listen, you know, there's the ideal, and then there's the struggle that we all have to reach that ideal. And, you know, daddy's telling you, well, you wouldn't say daddy to a 14-year-old maybe, but, you know, you say, you know, dad is not the perfect guy, but you know what? We all realize where we need to be, and we should do as best we can to get there. And we're not going to be perfect, and we're going to struggle, and we're going to fall, and you know, we all have our little idiosyncrasies. But,
right. And you know, and as guys, we often have that we want our daughters or sons to just always see where we just burst our shirt open. There's a big S on our chest, right?
Right.
You know, they want us to see as the men of steel that we're perfect. But I don't think there's anywhere in Scripture that it talks about that, of us being perfect. It's a perfect Savior that's come for us. But you know, we've walked through the muck and the mire and the valley.
Right.
And through all that, that's why we're refined.
Don't you think parents want so desperately to help their kids avoid some of the mistakes they've made?
Right.
That parents have a hard time sometimes communicating that in a way that's healthy?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a very healthy thing to have that desire that I don't want my kids to go through the same thing. But at the end of the day, the greenest grass is the one that takes the most rain. Meaning the grass, our souls, the reason that they become green and healthy is because they walk through those valleys and challenges. The reality is we either have to walk with them through it, or we have to stand on the outside and yell. And I'm telling you, if you're standing on the outside, they're not going to hear you. Because when you're in a storm, all you have time to do is bucket the water out of the boat. And so you have to be in the boat with them, whether it's on the internet or in a car, in a relationship, whatever it is, you have to be there with them.
You encourage the parents, we got about 30 seconds, you encourage your parents to look at the kids' MySpace page and use that as a starting block that says, you know, you talk about this as being your favorite show. Why is it your favorite show? Or why did you like that movie? I mean, can you even the benign little discussions that can be, you know, started from that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can use all those things as starting points to get into your kids' life and do it because you love them. You know, not every conversation you have with them has to be serious. Have fun with them. Joke with them. Tell them the ups and the downs, because that's how life is. It's comedy, it's drama, it's horror, it's all of that.
Well, it's been great talking with you, Jason, and we really appreciate it. We're going to have another show with you here on Hope on Fire this season too, so we're looking forward to that too. You know, the online world is a dangerous place for our kids to wander around in, but with the proper perspective, training, and supervision, our kids, with our help, can navigate safely. You know, as young adult Christians, we're exposed to quite a bit of immorality, even when we don't go looking for it. But a faith and a belief system firmly rooted in Jesus helps us skirt around the garbage and find the connections, the friendships, and the relationship-building opportunities with others online. You know, don't be afraid. Don't miss the opportunity that we have to reach out in a whole new way to those around us. If you would like more information about today's topic, I would encourage you to visit us on the web at www.hopeonfire.org. There you'll find links to Jason's MySpace page, links to online resources dealing with his book, and other tips for online social networking. Thanks for joining us this week on Hope on Fire. We'll see you again next week.
Hope on Fire is produced by Livestreams Media, a listener-supported ministry. To download a free copy of today's program or be a part of our social network, please visit our website at hopeonfire.org. You may also contact us by writing to Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860. Once again, that's Livestreams Media, P.O. Box 608513, Orlando, Florida 32860, or online at hopeonfire.org. Thank you so much for your letters and continued support. Until next time, may God set your hope on fire.